We are going live. We are live, Charles.
Thanks, Gary.
And if it's the first time you're tuning in, there'll be no surprise there because this is our first episode of something that should really be important to the whole world.
To everybody, improve your carbon footprint.
And Charles is a founder of quite an amazing charity. He's going to introduce himself, and we've got a quite an amazing young person on the phone who's also needs introducing. Charles.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of No CO2, which is spelled N number 0 CO2.org. NoCO2.org. Joelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Joelle. I'm a 22-year-old Canadian, and I'm an environmentalist here in Canada. And I'm very, very grateful to be on the show today.
We are grateful to have you. So here's a question. And I don't know quite how the next hour is going to go and how it's going to flow. You're an environmentalist. Would you consider yourself an environmentalist, Charles?
Absolutely.
What does that mean?
Joelle's been the student more recently, so Joel, do you want to take that one first? How do you see it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the environmental movement for the past 25 years has sort of been a lot about just raising awareness. And for me, I see myself as an activist, which means that we're not just raising awareness or talking about this, but we're actually acting on trying to save the planet. So I've done a lot of different kind of activism work over the past couple of years, working for different NGOs, and mostly just trying to bridge the gap between high-level climate science and politics and the mass of young people. So
I love that. You're acting. You're not just a couch potato sitting there moaning about that it's somebody else's fault. I love that answer.
Right.
Okay,
right. Yeah, the word is quite literal, activism.
What I would say, Gary, is that in the world we live in, many of us now have really lost the connection with the earth. My grandparents, my great-grandparents worked on farms, they did farming stuff. I mean, you know, I can't do that work now like many people in the UK and across the Western world. And I think the thing is, with all the science and technology, all the computers and everything, we've got this sort of sense that we know how to do stuff. But when you read these reports about the environment, about the damage to the environment caused by the climate, the bleaching of the coral, the bees disappearing, the insects dying, all this sort of stuff, I think it's time for us to realize that we've lost this connection and we have to regain this connection. So I'm an environmentalist. I'm learning a lot myself about this, and we absolutely have to protect the environment because this is what we're dependent on for our livelihood, for our food, and all the stuff around us. So I think it's critically important now that we change direction and do so much more to protect all these things around us that actually are fundamental to our life. I mean, how can we survive without bees to pollinate the fruit and the things
I
that
tell
we
you,
eat?
I think we've got into a mindset of thinking on some scientists will figure it out. And the lady in charge of healthcare for the UK, she said that human beings are very good at figuring out crises that are impending right now, but we're not very good at figuring out crisis that is coming in a slow way. But there's conversation about we're not going to be able to reverse what we've got in the next 10 years. Would you say that's fair?
It's a slow burning crisis. I want to bring Joelle in just a minute to talk about the young person's perspective, but certainly this has been a slow burning crisis. People knew about this in 1989 when there was a presentation to the US Congress about climate change. It's been going on slowly. And where we are now, as Gary's just said, we've got maybe only 10 years or so in which to really make a difference and fix this. So, Joelle, you know, the young people have not been part of what happened last 20 or 30 years ago, but what's your perspective now from the young person's perspective on what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, you know, some people sort of do still perceive climate change as an issue of the future, something that's coming, but what we all need to realize is that it is happening today, and it's becoming very unignorable around the world. We're seeing these huge hurricanes and heat waves and forest fires. So it really is a current issue, and I think that young people are very, very much in tune with what's happening, especially because, you know, we are going to be the ones who are inheriting the legacy of today's decisions. And we know that in 10 years, we won't be able to undo these decisions. So young people are playing a very big role in sort of creating this political pressure and pushing for the large-scale change that we know we need in order to avert this crisis.
Do you mind if I ask a question? Because
Yeah, of course.
I'm interested in people as well as the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in you. How did you shape to be the person you are? And I'm interested in you both, actually. When did the environment become an issue for you that you thought, this is so important, I have to do it? Was it 10? Was it 15? Was it 20? When did that happen for you? Because what I would love is this show, you're watching it and you actually do something about it and you feel inspired. So I'm hoping for this story
Right.
to tell us and share with us when you first became really interested in the environment.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it happened a couple years ago when I was in university and I started taking classes about global issues and stuff like that. And I sort of started to realize that climate change is really at the focal point of every single global issue that we are facing today. And I knew that I've always wanted to do something that helps people, but acting on climate change will help every single person and living organism on the planet. So that's sort of what drew me in initially. And ever since then, I've sort of just been trying to position myself where I believe I can make the most impact. So whether it's working for an environmental NGO or writing about climate change or participating in youth movements, I've just been trying to make as much impact as I possibly can. Because I really do believe that each of us can make a huge, huge difference. And all we have to do is just start. We have to take that one initial action and, you know, you never know where you'll end up.
And Charles, your turn. When did you first become passionate about this?
Okay, for me, so I was making some long haul flights. This was about 7-8 years ago now, and I started to become aware of how much CO2 I was creating. And at the time, I just didn't feel comfortable with donating to the schemes that there were. There were some carbon offset schemes, not because I didn't trust them, but I just felt that I felt they should be doing more to say that they're exactly what the money went to. So, you know, if you donate to people like British Airways and major airlines, you know, this is not a fraud, but they just weren't, for me, they were not being clear enough about how many trees they were planting or whatever they were doing. And so this business of enabling people to do something, for me, this was really, really important. In setting up No CO2, I really wanted to make something that enabled people easily to do something about it. So I met a lot of people out there who want to take action, but they just don't know what to do. And so that was one of the reasons for setting up No CO2, so it's actually really easy. Do something about it, donate, plant trees, and it's very, very cost effective. You get a lot of trees for your money.
So, this is beautifully leading into the title of the show, which is Improve Your Carbon Footprint Today. So, Charles, taking from your words, what can we do? And I love the statistics of how much a human being's carbon we use and how many trees that takes to make the equilibrium.
I think we've got to be honest about it, first of all, and most people I speak to really are not aware of this, but everybody in the UK, on average, is creating 7 tons of CO2 per person. So you know the delivery lorries you see going down the streets, Tesco, Waitrose, these sort of lorries. So those lorries fully laden, they're about 30 tons or so. So it's 7 tons of CO2. So the CO2 emissions for 4 people over the year are the weight of that lorry. So
Wow.
Gary, you've got a family of 4 plus.
Correct.
So your CO2 emissions are the weight of that Tesco delivery lorry.
Wow.
It's absolutely massive.
Wow. And so how do we neutralize that?
Well, the first thing people need to do in this situation with the climate emergency, the first thing people need to do is to look at reducing their CO2 emissions, because this is the priority. It's the CO2 emissions that we all make that are really messing things up. So we need to reduce that, and so what we can do, we can turn down the heating, we can use the car less, use public transport, bike or whatever instead. We can fly less, and again, one that people are not so much aware of, basically what we eat, so that eating less meat and particularly eating less beef and less lamb, basically will, through the system, will reduce CO2 emissions. So there's some pretty big items there.
Well, those are things that you do. Is there anything in particular that you do over there in Canada that you can reduce your carbon footprint?
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to add a little note sort of about what Charles was saying about
Please
how
do.
high our emissions per capita are in countries like or places like the UK and in Canada. And it sheds light on a really important but underlooked aspect of climate change, I think, that, it's the consumption and the lifestyles in these rich countries that are historically the biggest cause of climate change. So over 80% of carbon emissions have come from G20 countries, the 20 richest countries. So it is us and our lifestyles that are the problem, but at the same time, us living in these rich and democratic countries do have the biggest capacity to do something about it, which I think is a huge moral obligation, but it's also very empowering to know that we have the kind of choice in our lives that we can make choices to reduce our footprint and do things like eating less meat or carbon offsetting. So it is a choice, and it's something that I really do believe we have to do. And in terms of my perspective on, improving your carbon footprint, the way I see it, I think it's sort of a two-pronged sort of issue, is that we have to each reduce our own impact within the system by lowering our footprint, and we also have to be contributing to changing this actual system that incentivizes the emissions and the harm in the first place. So that's the way I understand it, and I think that these two sort of ways to take action are both indispensable and are interrelated, but we definitely need both.
So Gary, you asked earlier about really what made the difference in me getting involved in this, and for me, it's absolutely unthinkable that we could allow climate change to wreck our planet. So most people on the planet have got children. Those children will have will have grandchildren, and unless we do something about it, not only will the planet get wrecked, but the future of our children, the future of the wildlife, everything will be wrecked. So for me, there's this moral obligation, or whatever, responsibility, however you talk about it, that really we should be leaving the planet in a better state than when we arrived.
There are certain politicians out there that say that there's no such thing as climate change or a climate emergency. Can we deny that there was an ice age? It's happened before, the dinosaurs and ice age. But I'm speaking as an uneducated. I'm no expert on this, but I would think that if we go back millions of years, the Earth did change, and it changed beyond recognition. Do you think that's a fair comment? Am I wrong in what I'm saying?
The Earth has changed, but the current state that we're in is really a very, very short period. I mean, people are saying now that that human life emerged sort of 66 million years ago. So the period of recorded history is 5,000 years, something like this. We're in the whole scale of things, we're in a tiny little window, and the risk is that just within that tiny window, we're actually going to wreck the thing for the future. If there's an ice age, if there's a meteorite strike, I mean, no one's going to be responsible for that, but governments certainly are watching out for meteorites and stuff, because if there is a big one, it could be massive. But it's really the responsibility of what we can do in our lifetime that I think for me, is critically important. But Joelle, over to you on this one.
Yeah, I would say that, any sort of denial of the actual atmospheric science of climate change is unfounded, because, it's something that 98% of scientists from every single political regime in the world agree upon. And we know that, the climate has changed in the past millions of years, but the rate of change that we're seeing now since industrial times is 100 times faster than it's ever been. And so we know that it is the direct result of human activity, and specifically of the sort of industrialized lifestyles that we live. So yeah, there's no denying that.
Something that's worried me, and I've only found out about it in the last year or so. Do you remember, everybody will know this story, but for a long time the tobacco industry denied the link between tobacco and cancer, and it went on for years and years and years. And what's come out is that the oil companies, some of the oil companies, actually back in 1989, they knew their people produced their own forecasts, which showed the sort of thing that's happening now. And there's a dishonesty about these people. If people genuinely didn't know, you can have all sorts of situations where people didn't know. But in the world we're in, I think what's coming out is that a lot of situations people really do know what's going on. The oil companies have known about this for a long time. They haven't been straightforward about it with people, and it's caused a massive amount of damage to the planet, to the point where now we're at this point, well, can we pull it round and recover the planet or not? And that's because there's been so many years of faffing around and delay. So now we're at the point where something has to be done. There's potentially 10 years to get it done. We need to crack on and do it. And everybody, it's an emergency, right? It's a climate and environmental emergency. It's very simple. Everyone needs to be doing their bit. And so absolutely people should be saying, what can I do?
So even if it's as simple as sharing this podcast and educating people it's shocking to me that we digest a credit card of plastic a week. This still shocks me. From the rubber on the tires to the environment. Unbelievable, to the bottles on the top of the plastic bottles. This is not good for even the human body. So there's lots of things you can do. And I'm told that you're at a conference next week after? The international conference.
No, the conference that's happening is the UN conference. The UN have got a climate summit in
Can you
New
tell
York,
us about that?
which is the 23rd of September. It's a really key meeting because the UN, it's called the UNFCCC, that they are the organisation on behalf of the world have got the remit, they've got the mandate to stabilise greenhouse gas emissions, which is CO2. So they say on their website, they say themselves that greenhouse gas emissions are continuing to rise. So they say on their own website that they failed the mandate they've been given because CO2 emissions have been rising every year for the last, since 1986 or something. So they failed by their own remit. So this is really a last chance for them to pull the rabbit out of the hat and actually get the world to commit to finally do something about reducing emissions. But think about what's happening, and let's ask Joel to come in on this as well. There are massive vested interests. The oil and gas industry, these are the people who are producing 80% of the CO2 emissions. The dairy and meat industry, they're producing an enormous amount of greenhouse gas emissions as well. So these people, they've got to change. So we've got to change our habits. They've got to change their businesses in order to match up with what the world needs to do. And these guys haven't yet really fully taken on board what they do need to do. So Joelle, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think that you're definitely right in that, the oil companies are a huge part of this, and they're also a big part of the reason that the UN negotiations have been so unsuccessful. So I've actually been at the past 2 years at the UN climate negotiations, and it's been so incredibly frustrating sitting in that room with all the negotiators and country delegates and sort of hearing these leaders giving these big speeches about, we need to change things, but then there's a couple of the biggest oil producing countries who are able to sort of block progress for all of the rest of countries and the climate plans that we're trying to make. So this year it was Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Russia, and I believe it was one fourth country who sort of blocked the idea that we needed to really amplify climate action under the Paris Agreement, and so they are really holding the whole world back. But I think that what this sort of has shown people is that we can't leave it up to these decision makers and to the people in the oil industry to make change themselves, because they're simply not going to do that, especially because they have such vested interests within this industry. And so that's why we need to each take it upon ourselves to start taking action ourselves and contributing to these mass protests and pushing for this big change, because it's not going to happen on itself, and we need to show them that if they're not going to take action, we will.
So Joelle, you've been in a really, really privileged place, and I'm really jealous. So you've been sitting in the negotiation room when people were saying yes, we should do this, no, we should not do this, right? So what
Right.
was the sense in the rest of the room when people were blocking this? So you've got a small team of country representatives blocking this, and you've got what, 1,000, 2,000 people in the room who are sort of hating them or something. So how does that work? What's the sense of feeling in the room at the time, Joelle?
Well, it was a really interesting experience being there. When I first went, I was 18 years old. So being there as a young person was really interesting because, you know, we could see all of this stuff happening, but we really couldn't do anything about it. We didn't have any voting privilege within the negotiations. And I think a lot of people were very, very frustrated and very disappointed with what was happening in the negotiations. But at the same time, I do think it sort of does fuel people to want to take more action themselves because, you know, it makes people angry and it's unfair. And we have to act on those feelings of frustration and sadness. And we really just have to turn those emotions into action. And that's
You're a very
what I
positive
felt myself
person.
doing. Yeah, I think we sort of have to be. I think a lot of the discourse around climate change is just about avoiding this catastrophe, but I think we also have to think about at this very critical juncture in the history of our planet, like what kind of world do we want to be creating when we know we're going to be having these huge changes in the way that we do basically everything. We have to be thinking about, like, okay, let's create something more beautiful and something where that we can have social equity and sustainability in the world that we're creating rather than just focusing on avoiding disaster because, you know,
Catastrophe,
that
those
won't be-
words, those huge words, but it's happening now. I've got a cousin I spent some time with, and his 4-year-old kept getting allergies, she was getting tonsillitis, she was very ill, and they moved out of the city into the countryside. And guess what? She never took antibiotics. It was a complete change from the environment. And I think that it's in front of our eyes that we can see this thing, to me. And I just would like to appeal to people that don't see it. How are we going to get through to them?
It's a massive issue, Gary. I mean, during the 20th century, we had the First World War, and then just within 20 years, there was the Second World War, which kicked off. And coming out of that finished in 1945, and so coming out of that, there was a real feeling that people needed to do something, and out of that came the coalescence of Europe, so that France and Germany the idea was that they would never ever fight again. And then in 1948 was the foundations of the United Nations. And so the United Nations has taken the lead on a lot of stuff. So they've got the 17 sustainability goals, which they're working on, things like poverty and health, and including climate change. So they've got all of those. But the UN started on this, the program started working on climate change really from in a major way from 1990s onwards, and it's been very, very slow, as Joelle said, because it's sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There's the opposition from the vested interests. And so where we are now is that either we all come together and do something, or we do just a few more years of delay, and then it's game over, because we then wreck the planet inevitably, because we cannot wind the thing back in time. And people need to be aware of that. And I think if people think about it, then logically we do need to do something about it. We absolutely need to protect the planet for all of those reasons. But people are not yet at that point where they're seeing what's really at stake here.
Well, I feel very privileged to be interviewing both of you, really, because you're an activist. You're doing something about it. For me, I try and on a very core, on a basic level, if I see some shopping and it's covered in plastic unnecessarily, I won't do it. The other day, I didn't buy a plastic bottle. I bought a glass bottle. When I go to the supermarket, I take a bag. I try and cycle. And I've got a really horrible feeling that's quite a lot more than what most people do.
So Gary, that's great. You've got the awareness, and then now you've started, you can build on that with all the other things. It's so critical that we reduce our CO2 emissions. Every time you use the car, every litre of fuel you're putting in that car, you're creating 2.5 kilograms of CO2. So when you don't use the car, when you share the lift with somebody, share the car, when you walk or something, whatever, then you're not creating that. That's so important. Electric cars will be coming in, they'll be making a difference, but the issue for a lot of people at the moment is just the expense. People, most people can't afford a new electric car. And so what it comes down to people doing what they can. Switching electricity supply is a good one. It's a great one for people to do, because the thing is with electricity, you don't notice it. You switch to green, clean electricity. It costs approximately the same as electricity from the big six, but you do save a lot of CO2 in the process.
Wow, so we've got that option. What comes to mind is what happened in the Amazon. Do you think this will affect people all over the world? That we lost. How much of that forest did we lose? They call it the lungs of the world.
Joelle, do you want to pick up on that one first?
Yeah, for sure. I will say something I think about the Amazon, which really is important, is that I think that Amazon, everyone's been seeing on the news, the Amazon on fire, and I think this is really sort of exemplifying like the bigger picture of what is happening, where we see these corporate interests destroying our planet for the sake of profit. And the Amazon is a really, really tangible and extreme example of that, but this is what's happening everywhere, like all the companies that are exploiting the natural resources for the sake of profit. And I think the Amazon has really, really brought that into the public eye, which is important, but we shouldn't have to see a fire this big for people to start paying attention to this. But I do see that, stuff like this is pushing people to really wake up to the reality that we're facing. And in terms of the actual impact, the burning of the Amazon is extremely consequential, because, as you mentioned, it holds 20% of the world's carbon sink, as well as 20% of the world's water. And I think what this sort of highlights is that, the issue we're facing is not just about carbon emissions. Carbon emissions are part of it, but it's about the fact that what we're doing to exploit the natural world and pollute the natural world is killing our entire ecosystem. We can think about the Earth as a living organism, like the same way as the human body, and all of our different organs, like our lungs and our heart, whatever, all have their own systems, but they contribute to this one living organism. And the Earth is the same thing. So, with the Amazon burning, it's messing up the carbon cycle, it's messing up the water cycle, and it will have effects on the entire ecosystem of Earth, which is why, if the Amazon burns down, essentially, like, the whole world is going to feel the implications of that, and, we won't be able to turn back from that. The Amazon is half of the rainforest we have left on Earth, so if that burns down, it's just going
Charles
to be
told me that there's
everyone.
a ridiculous amount of the Madagascar rainforest depleted.
Well, in a lot of countries there's been massive deforestation. So originally the UK was mainly forest, and now the UK's got one of the lowest proportions of forest in Europe.
Has it really?
Yeah, Italy apparently is about 40% forested, which is high. Madagascar has been about 90% deforested. So that's one of the areas where we're planting trees. So that's really, really important to get trees back into there. I mean, the data from a really reputable US environmental organization is saying that there are probably 500 million hectares available worldwide that have been deforested, which could be reforested. So when areas are deforested, apparently what happens is that the soil very quickly becomes unsuitable for growing crops, and so it becomes available to reforest it. And if that were reforested at the sort of rates we were talking about, that could offset the CO2 emissions for 700 million people across the world. So it's absolutely massive how much CO2 can be removed by that. And obviously, because situations like in these forest fires, they're out of control, not only in the Amazon, there are forest fires also for the same reasons in Africa, and crazily there's also forest fires in the Arctic, Siberia. So if people are going to be burning this stuff down, then absolutely we do need to be replanting stuff as well. We need to be replanting to get this back into balance.
And then it comes down to money. Who's going to pay for it? And greed is definitely an issue here. We need to talk solutions. We've talked a lot about the challenges that we have. So if I gave you both a magic wand, and that magic wand could give you as many wishes as you like, and it was to do with the environment, what would be your 3 top wishes with your new magic wand?
Oh, what I'd say, Gary, is that people should take a look at the website for Saving Our Planet. So Saving Our Planet is the parent organisation for the No CO2 tree planting. And so there's 2 really, really good up-to-date papers there. On the front of the website is our Point of View 6. And Point of View 6 is specifically aimed at the UN discussions in a couple of weeks' time in New York. It's saying to them what they need to do. And then the previous Point of View 5, is saying basically it's a list of 12 things. So 7 of them are things that individuals can do, and 5 of them are things that really only governments can do, like decarbonising the electricity system. But there's a load of points there. So that's the sort of first outline plan. Joelle, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, sure. Top 3 wishes. I like that question. I was thinking, we are asking people to do all these things like reduce your emissions, blah, blah, blah. But I think that something often missed from these discussions is that we need people to get back in touch with the real reasons that they care about this issue. And for most people, we aren't passionate about carbon emissions themselves. We're passionate about preserving a prosperous, healthy, and happy life on like a habitable planet with people that we love. So I think we need to really constantly remind ourselves of this and sort of let that love for each other and for the planet be what drives us to act rather than just acting because we feel like we have to or people are telling us, oh, you need to take action. We have to actually want to do it. And I think that when you are acting on that passion and that care, it really changes the way that you go about your work in this field. So I think that would be the number one thing because it's very, deeply rooted sort of solution, I guess. And
I love that. For the record, I think that motivates human beings much more. And
definitely,
I hear the love in your voice, and it's lovely, and that certainly inspires me. I love that answer.
Oh, thank you. But that would be wish number 1. Wish number 2, I guess, would be that we see the kind of systemic change that we know we need to solve the climate crisis. That means that polluters have to pay for their emissions and that, we can no longer be fracking oil and stuff like that. But, that wish can only happen if my 3rd wish, I guess, would be for every single person becomes an active agent in creating this change. Because, like I said before, the systemic change is not just going to happen on its own, but the power of each of us, especially when we act together as a collective, is huge. So, that would be my wish because I think that most people want to live on a habitable planet and want to see a better future, but we just need to act on those wishes.
That's amazing, Joelle. I totally agree with that. There's a stage before all of this detail which you've talked about, which is people wanting to do something about it, and that's absolutely critical. So. So why aren't people so readily being willing to do something about it? And I think the way it's been messaged is that people feel that they're being attacked in terms of, well, if people say, well, you can't use a car, you're not supposed to fly, you can't do all these sorts of things, you can't turn the central heating up. People feel they're being attacked, and like a lot of things, I think people have got to be aware of the problem, which is why we need to do something, but people also got to look beyond this to what is a better world. So there's some aspects of a better world. For example, poor people in countries like Africa At the moment, they are held to ransom by the suppliers of fossil fuels. So they use kerosene lamps. They don't need heating, but they need kerosene for lighting in the evening, and they get charged a lot of money for kerosene. So these people can pay 25% of their earnings just on kerosene for lighting. Now, if these people have a solar panel, there's plenty of sun in these countries. If they have a solar panel, then they can be off grid. So once they've got their panel, they're not hostage to oil and energy infrastructure companies who want to rip them off. So that's something that benefits them. But we've also got to create this vision of society for the West, for ourselves, which is going to be a better society coming out of this. And I think one of the things is that absolutely in the future there is going to be, and there needs to be, more energy for all, so that we can meet our needs for transport, getting around, and all the other things we do with energy. We need to do that, but it needs to be much more renewable energy, with taking fossil fuels completely out of the equation for the future.
Yeah, Charles, I think you touched on a really important point there, specifically about messaging and how sort of the discourse around climate change today actually discourages a lot of people from taking action. And I completely agree with you that all this discourse that's about pressuring people and making them feel like it's their fault or antagonizing them is really counterproductive, especially just because of the way that human brains naturally think. So I think that how we communicate this really, really does matter. And I think that our messaging needs to be empowering. It needs to be putting the solutions right in front of people's faces so that it's easy for them to take action. And our messaging can't just be, talking about the problem. We have to be providing solutions. And I know that's what you guys are doing with No CO2, and that's as well what I'm trying to do in my own work. So it is wonderful and inspiring, I think, to see the millions of people and organizations and activists around the world that are really taking action. And I think we need to bring that into the focal point of.
So when we talk about communication. When we talk about communication, do you think the press are doing enough? Because recently, over the summer, in our main centre in the West End, in Oxford Street, hundreds of activists chained themselves to a boat, and they glued themselves to the walls, and but it got a tiny bit of coverage. But I can only imagine that's happening all over the world. That people are angry about this. What's happening in Canada right now?
In Canada, we have coming up on September 20th and 27th, huge global climate strikes all over the world. So I'm working with the youth climate organizers here in Canada to mobilize all these young strikers for those as well.
Did you say strike? You're going to strike?
Yeah, the climate strikes, Fridays for Future. So there's huge ones coming up on the 20th and 27th as well. I'm sure there will be ones in the UK. So everyone is encouraged to take part in these strikes. And also these ones are a big deal because the past year, climate strikes have been directed towards students, asking students and young people to strike. But these upcoming strikes, we're asking professionals to strike as well. So they're asking everyone who can to just show up in the streets and, build this kind of pressure together. And it does get a lot of press attention, as well as also puts pressure on politicians, especially in democratic countries where they see, okay, this huge percentage of the population cares about this, so maybe we should start acting on it as well. So those are two huge upcoming things, 20th, 27th, mark the date. And in Canada, we also have a federal election coming up on October 21st. So that is a really big deal because, who we have in power for the next 4 years can make a greater difference than anything that we can do as individuals. So one individual action that we haven't actually spoken about here yet today is voting, and voting with the climate in mind. And that is something that can make a huge difference. Especially, I think, if you look to a country like America as an example, to see their current leader and how just a change in government can really affect the entire way a country is run. So, yeah, I'm working on the election here in Canada and working to mobilize young voters, and we will be specifically pushing for the Green Party here, who have the best climate plans. If anyone is interested in checking out what I'm doing here, we have this big campaign around the election on Instagram, and our name is For Life Online, so it's FORLIFE_online. And that's what we're working on here in Canada.
Do you think we'll ever see a day where we have a Green Party in charge? Because they get criticised for not looking after the economy or that things will go up. They've done reasonably well. They've got 2 parliamentary seats in the UK, in the south. Is it still the case?
I think they've got one MP, and then they've got some European Parliament as well.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever see the day where the Green parties will be more dominant in politics?
Well, I think the upcoming elections here in Canada right now, the Green Party is expected to gain more seats than they ever have.
That's great.
And the reason that I think there's so much hope as well is because young people in Canada, we make up the largest voting bloc in our country. So that means who we vote for essentially can win if we all show up and vote. And young people are really, really passionate about the environment, but a big problem is that a lot of these people who are passionate and out protesting just simply aren't showing up to vote. But we do have the power to, if all young people in Canada voted Green, we could have a Green government, which is insane. It's amazing, especially in a country as powerful as Canada, that could have implications around the whole world. So I do think it is possible, and that is why I'm dedicating my entire life towards it right now. But even if we can't get a majority government of Greens in Canada, even just electing a couple more of them into Parliament makes a big difference, because they are influencing the policy that comes out of the entire House of Commons, and they're holding the other parties accountable, and they're really pushing for more progressive policy. So either way, voting Green
that
really helps.
is really big picture stuff. So I guess if I got my magic wand out, and as a regular person, that would be it, I guess, to have a Green Party in charge, and to have people with green credentials.
Definitely. And I think it sort of can create this sort of self-healing cycle, where people are taking action, and then the government is seeing that this is what people want. So the government makes more policies that make taking action more easy, and they start funding, renewable energy and cutting funds for fossil fuels, and then more and more people start taking action. So it really is like this virtuous cycle that just begins with people taking one simple action.
I
find that really powerful.
What I'd like to pick up on, Joelle, is what you said about the strikes on the 20th of September. So where this came from, this came, I think, really out of the protests made by Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl, 16-year-old Swedish girl. So she, speaking on behalf of young people who are not voters at her age, not voters, made a huge difference earlier in the year, and that led to school strikes. As people, Gary said, Extinction Rebellion operating in London also made a difference in terms of massively raising awareness. So I think people may have different views on strikes, but the 20th of September is a great opportunity for people to show that they want something done about climate change, whether it's treated as a strike or whether involvement in the protest, however people see it. It's certainly an opportunity for people to do something. So the date in the UK is the Friday the 20th, well, a week today, Friday the 20th of September. That's a day when there's going to be a lot of activities in London and in many other towns and cities as well.
I feel quite inspired to certainly take the day off, because you don't have to necessarily strike. You could say, look, to your boss, give me an unpaid day, and show up.
Right.
There are people afraid of, I'm going to go on strike, I'll get fired. So there are other options. Just be creative. Just say to your boss that I'll make up a day another time.
To be there on that
and
day.
a lot of people.
Yeah, to be there on that day is important. If people can, it's showing something wants to be done. So I went along on to the one in London on the 26th of September. That was a very, very peaceful meeting organised by the Climate Coalition and others. It was a really nice day. There was a really great atmosphere of feeling that you were involved in doing something. So I really would encourage people to look at what's going on locally and get involved.
Definitely. And in terms of people who are wanting to strike from work, a lot of people are actually going up to their employers and saying, hey, why doesn't our whole office participate in the strike? And making it this fun social thing, because like as we were saying, a lot of this climate action, people see it as like, oh, it's like a chore or a task or something that we have to do, but it's something that we get to do, and that's really exciting and really empowering. And these climate strikes, I can speak from personal experience, was one of the most sort of energizing experiences that I've ever had in my life. We had one in Montreal last March on the day of global climate strikes on March 15th, I believe it was, and the strike in Montreal was the largest one in the world. There was 150,000 people that showed up, and just to feel that collective energy and to see all these people around you that want change and that will actually show up to show the world that we're making this change happen is super duper empowering. So I really highly recommend getting to these strikes if it's in your capacity.
That sounds lovely. And then there we go. That gives us a lovely feel to the whole of the show. We've been on air nearly 50 minutes, and it really has flown by. Can we conclude with some of the more bigger things that just regular people can do?
Sure. Let's just come back to the planting trees.
Please.
So the benefit of planting trees is that for every year the trees are growing, they remove CO2 from the air. Because we're planting on land that's been deforested, this is a net addition. So every year the trees are growing, they are absorbing CO2 before they then get into a steady state situation. If you're in the UK, then we're creating 7 tons of CO2 per person per year. To remove all of that each year, then you need to plant 1,750 trees, which is
golden number.
We do that as a donation. Donate the money, and it's £187. So for £187, we plant the 1,750 trees. Now, if you're in Canada, Australia, or the USA, like Joelle is, then it does take some more trees. So their average is 16 tons a year. So they need to plant 4,000 trees.
Wow!
A lot more trees.
Wow!
And of course, but once you've done that, you've done what you can for the moment. You've done that. Obviously, people need to reduce their CO2 as well. That's really, really important. But in terms of offsetting, removing the CO2, plant your trees and job done. And of course you can pay monthly, you don't have to pay all at once, you can pay £5 a month over 3 years, does the same thing.
So the show notes, if you're listening to this on my podcast, the show notes will be below. If you're watching this on Facebook, we'd love you to share, like, comment. I've seen, we've had people watching that nobody's made a comment yet. We more than likely are going to do this again in a couple of weeks. Charles, do you want to tell us you've got a guest lined up?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks' time will be the 27th of September. That will be just after the UN meeting in New York. And that would be a great opportunity for us here live to talk about what's happened in New York with our comments. And basically, it's like anticipating that football match, isn't it? That football match coming up. Is it going to be a great result? Are a load of countries going to commit to deal with their greenhouse gases, or are we going to have the scenario which Joelle described happened last time, when there were a number of countries who basically blocked the whole thing and messed it up? So what's going to happen? We're going to be talking about that in 2 weeks' time, on the 27th of September.
Joelle. But I'd like to acknowledge you both as amazing human beings. That if it wasn't for people actually doing something, because I have a lot of movement in my life, but I'm nowhere near the energy that you both have to creating a better world for all of us. So I acknowledge you both. I'd love the last words to be to you both. If you had a message that you could give the world and everybody was going to hear that message, what would that message be?
I think it's...
Do you want to go last? Because this is your show.
Yeah. Joelle, over to you.
If you could give a message that the whole world was going to hear, what would that message be?
I guess I would tell people that you just need to start taking action. Start with one little thing, and you might, really surprise yourself with how good it feels, or how much, it makes you realize that you want to do more. And I think that also once you start taking action, other people will follow. And it's the same thing like you're saying, Barry, that, you feel inspired listening to Charles and I speak about this stuff. It's contagious. When we take action, when people see their friends doing it, they're like, oh, I can do this too. So I would say to really not underestimate the power that each of us have, and to believe that we can make a difference, and to just start engaging with it and start doing it.
Brilliant. Truly inspiring. Charles,
Okay.
do you want to wrap up our podcast today and our live Facebook
Thanks, Gary.
broadcast?
Yeah, for me, I think there's 4 points to summarize. Firstly is people need to think about reducing their CO2 emissions, and great, do that in the way that Joelle's just talked about. Do something to start off with. Then think about removing the rest of your CO2, and a simple way of doing that, as we've discussed, is to plant lots of trees with no CO2. Thirdly, talk to your friends about this, because it's only by talking to people that other people get involved, because most people are so busy they're not really seeing this. So talk to other people, talk about what you think about it, what you're going to do, get them involved. And fourthly, all this is so much easier if you work with a local or national or whatever group. So think about joining a group. The international group that I'm part of is Saving Our Planet, so you can take a look at the website, join that. And if you want something more locally in the UK, look at the Climate Coalition. There's a lot of local organisations growing up, and so if you can look at a website, so where there is a climate emergency, so if you can look up on a website where there is a climate emergency, see if there's a climate emergency in your area has been declared. So basically, if a climate emergency has been declared in your area, most likely there will be a local group either formed or thinking about forming, and that's a great opportunity to join in, because that group will be local. There'll be people just within a few miles of where you live, and it makes a whole difference to the energy of this when you're working with alongside real people.
So you've both inspired me today. I want to go and lie on the grass in the middle of a field and enjoy the environment. I want to have less contribution to any harm. And I hope if you've watched this today, you feel a little bit that way. You've gone towards that. It's been fascinating to talk to you both. I cannot wait for the next episode. And if you've been watching, please like, share, comment, maybe even make a donation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.